Hi, and welcome to this second video in my small series about data communication. In this video, I'll be talking about the document, and I'm putting it in the goose eyes here because, well, document can be a lot of different things, but we're not focusing on the visualization part just yet. It'll come in one of the next videos here, but in this one, I'll be focusing on documents, so where we are mixing text or just having text and maybe some visualizations, some graphics included in it. Again, it's for the data analyst, these ones here. It can of course be used by other people because, well, many people, they work with documents, they communicate through documents. And as in our previous video, we are now looking into some more frameworks, some more structure on how we do it, why we do it, but let's dig into it. Why is it that we're talking about documents? Well, especially as I talked about in the last video, sometimes we need to control a story and have this user or the reader reach a conclusion. The conclusion should be the one that we are presenting. So if we're working in a data storytelling type, a document is often a good way to go. Documents are often more static than websites or visualizations or interactions, but or presentations. But I'll dig a little bit into it in the coming slides. But quite often, this is the main communication tool for an analyst. So I'll be talking about 4 types of documents in this small presentation here. First of all, the report, where you have a front page index, page number, a mix of visuals and text. And it can't be anything from the big financial report that you see on stock exchange listed companies, all the way down to a small report that you might do for a school. All of them are reports, and all of them need to include these things. The memo is the mix between the report and the letter. You have a specific recipient and you peeling away a lot of the information that you have in the report. Quite often, it's also without any of the visual elements that you put into the report or the layouting that you have there. Next one, I'll talk about the website, and it's a little bit special document in this world here because it's interactive and because you have to search for information, or that's at least the mindset that most people enter a website with. Not many go there to read it from top to bottom. Last one I'll talk about is the email or a letter in the modern version. Letters have a standard set of structures or expectations from the reader. The email are more conversational once in a while, but they also sometimes have this letter structure or format. But I'll talk a little bit about how to use it so you don't get lost in this correspondence. But let's start a little bit with a few general principles. First of all, associations. Associations is what we're talking about contrast. In my slides here, you can see it's just black and white or gray scale colors, but that's a simple contrast and making sure that things are listed against each other. Then I'm having repetitions. That could be either text or content repetition or structural repetitions. As you see, I have the 3 elements over here, and that's 3 repeated elements structures which are set up so that you can see this is fitting together. Then I have the well, let's scratch that and say closeness, or things which are close together are also associated together with each other. So here we're looking at the things which are placed physically or structurally close to each other. Those are the ones that we will be focusing on. Next one is the reading structure, and there's 3/4 reading structures that we'll be talking about here, depending on how you're interacting or how the user is interacting with the document. Either you have the Gutenberg style, which is the squares, and you see it if you have a text editing program, a simple Word document, you'll see the header and the footer and some side margins, and you have the text in the middle. That's the Gutenberg style or Gutenberg structure. You also have the C structure, and that's more related to how you're reading it. And well, if you are from a country where the text goes from your right to your left, well, then you have an S structure, or Chinese Asian countries, you might have an inverted version of it. But in general, you start from the reading direction, and then you go across, and then you go the opposite way at the bottom. It's a way of skimming information rather quickly. It's also a way that you can place at the corners the different elements that you want people to focus on. F structure is used if people are searching for things, and especially in the websites. I'll get back to that in a minute. Layouts is also an important thing. Fonts, as you can see, my fonts here are what's called sans-serif, which means that there's no small feet on the letters. Quite often in the digital world, we're using sans-serif because it's easier to digest, and the resolutions on the screens are not capable of getting proper serifs communicated. But in the more traditional way of news paper or in books, you have the serifs, because then you get the words to stand together and the emphasis on the spaces between the words. It makes it easier to read. A couple of things regarding the fonts is also that, as a general, don't use more than 2 fonts. Font for the headline and a font for the body text. There is, however, one additional consideration here, especially for the analysts, which I'll get into it within a second. Because sometimes you make reports, and well, quite often you make reports, and if your audience is other analysts or people in the technical realm, and you're using notebooks like a Jupyter notebook or Markdown or Quadro document to write your coding, then you can provide your third font, because your code you will put as a separate font, because then you are able to distinguish what that is quite easily and quite rapidly. And people who are not technical or not interested in coding font, they can skip across that very rapidly. So just like I talked about in the previous video, who's the audience? Who is reading this is your first consideration. Do we make it a long or do we make it a short? If it's a full report, well, as mentioned, front page, index, bibliography, list of figures, list of tables, footnotes, all these kind of things must be included. They must be standardized across the document. And most often it's also standardized across all documents within the company. And that's where the brand guideline comes in. If your company does not have a brand guideline, go to the website, go to the front page. How does the logo look? Which colors are included? What are the colors across the different images across your website? What kind of style is it using? Mirror that within your report, not because you want it to look good, but because you want to lower the mental load for the reader. You want them to focus on the content and not the format. If you are focusing on the content, well, then it's more likely that you will have them reach the proper conclusion, the conclusion that you want them to reach. The last part, as I mentioned, the C reading style. So starting in the corner, reading across the first line, yes, it makes sense, and reading across the bottom line. It's the skimming technique, And most of the time, well, we'd like to say that everybody reads every single word of our reports. They don't. Sorry to break the bubble. They will skim it if they're really interested in it, and that's where it comes in, and meaning that you need to make sure on the lines across you have the important content. You make sure that if you want them to read it, it's placed in those locations. The memo, as mentioned, is a short version of the report, and it excludes often the graphical elements. It has a specific, often single person as a recipient, and it has a subject line. Different companies have different formats, different standards for it, but quite often it's a way of quickly reaching the point, the goal, and especially having a conclusion up front, kind of like the CED or Conclusion Evidence Data Framework that I mentioned in the previous video. If we're then looking at the website dashboard, we have a little difference in the interactions because people are task focused. They're not there to get the story, they're there to find information, which means that it needs to be searchable, it needs to be skimmable, it needs to be highlighted where information is, and again, conclusions up front and center. It's quite often you don't see people scrolling down the pages. It's actually quite a standard way of assessing a page content, that how often are people actually going down below the fold, as it's called, below what's shown on the front line or front page without scrolling. Therefore, conclusions, evidence, data. It's also a place where you have interactions, so think about your menus, how are they described. It's a little bit like your headlines in your report, but more focused on the tasks that people are looking for to accomplish. Then we're looking at accessibility and predictability. You might want to have a line under a word because it's important. Moving into the online space, that's not necessarily a good idea because there's an expectation of hyperlinks or links to other pages. It might be on your own site or it might be outside your site that they are on the line. So people have an impression of being able to click on things underlined. The same way, if you have a link, you want people to click on it, put a line below it. As opposed to the previous memo or report where you had the C pattern, you have an F or maybe even an E pattern reading. So you start up here, look over, nothing here, maybe a little bit less here, and maybe you find it, and then you start reading across. Which is also why that you many websites see the menu up in the upper left corner. Even though you have a website which is, say, Arabic language, it's still placed up here because we're starting to see a standardization across cultures on the websites. I've also mentioned dashboards up here because dashboards, or the interactive small websites where people can interact with your data visualization and your data communication, is a website. And if you consider it as a website, you are on the track to reaching a website or a dashboard which people will use. I quite often talk to companies who has hundreds of dashboards, and the standard answer I get when asking them, hey, so how many of them are used, is that, well, I don't dare to look up. Because quite often we build a dashboard because someone has asked for some information. They were task focused. We provided to them, but it's not repeatable tasks that they need to do there. They could have gotten the report and then they got the information there. So look at that as a website. Do you want to maintain a website? Well, if you want to maintain a website, then you can do the dashboard. But let's move a little bit on here, because we also have the emails. And as mentioned, it is a new version of the letter, and it has 3 parts. I'm starting a little bit in front of the last one here, but we have the meta content where we have the subject line. We have that both in the physical letter and in the email. We also have the CC line, where who is in what's called carbon copy, or who is also getting this information. It's not the persons in the CC or the carbon copy which will be expected to take action on it. If they're expected to take action on it, they need to be in the to content. And then we have some of the automated content. We have some date, we have some time, we have some from lines, which is coming out automatically. In the regular letter, these information would have had to be included manually in the document. The body text, remember there is a first line. First line is quite often displayed in the recipient's email reader. So the first line is super important, because that's what they see. Then we need to have an action focus, and not too long an email. You might feel like you want to explain everything, but as it is a letter which has an action focus, and people are on average spending just a few seconds on skimming reading emails. If you want them to have taken action, it needs to be straight to the point. Don't put multiple actions into the same email. One action, because then you can have a conversation about that specific action. It might also be in a mail thread, multiple actions occur. Split the thread up and start a new line with that specific action, because then it becomes searchable for later. The last one, the signature setting, isn't for the most part an automated line, kind of like the automated content in your meta over the other side. Here you have your name, your role, and quite often a disclaimer, because if this email reaches the wrong recipient, you want them to delete it. And especially with privacy laws popping up all over the world, me coming from the European Union, GDPR is a huge thing, and something which can really cost your company or your organization if you don't have it under control. It might also be that you say, okay, if we have personal identifiable content, keep it only as long as you're needing this information. We have tools like iRecorder, which you can install on your computer. These tools you can use quite easily to record what is happening. It is a little bit more difficult if you want to have external people using it, but starting it up with an iRecorder on your website is not that difficult if you can get potential users in. As a data analyst, try to make a mock-up of your dashboard, your display. Have people interact with the mock-up. It might just be on paper. What do they expect to click and point on? What do they expect to happen? Because you want these interactions to follow along with what they're looking at. Quite often it's the same, but sometimes you will catch things which you do not expect. Sometimes they want to have some information up here, but you placed it down here. That can rather easily be solved at the prototype stage. So you use this at your prototype stage, and then you can validate it later on when you have a more functional model. That was it for this small video. The next one I'll start to get a little bit more into the visualization side of things. So see you in that one there. All right, bye bye.